for the hardest-hitting show in talk radio. The true progressive voice since 2012. This is Southpaws.
And welcome to Southpaws on the Pacifica Radio Network. We are the leaders of the revolution. I'm Darren Gibson, your host today. On this episode, Mr. Freeze is at it again. Mitch McConnell froze speaking to reporters Wednesday at an event in Covington, Kentucky. We'll have the audio from that event. Also, Rudy has to pay up, talking about Rudy Giuliani. We'll tell you that story. And I can't even laugh about Ottawa County, Michigan anymore. So they're part of a double hammer time segment you won't want to miss. And we've got a few more stories to tell you about. But before we get started with today's topics, a couple of reminders that you can follow us on social media by going to facebook.com/Southpaws Radio Show. You can follow us on X, the former Twitter, at Southpaws Radio. You can follow us on Tumblr at southpawsradioshow.tumblr.com. You can follow us on YouTube by doing a search for Southpaws Radio. You can also follow us that way on Mastodon. And you can become a patron of the show by going to patreon.com/Southpaws Radio. You can listen to the show anytime at Apple Podcasts, Spreaker, Google Podcasts, Podcast Addict, Podvine, and Pandora by doing a search for Southpaws. Once you found our logo, you found us. We send links to our weekly episodes to our Facebook, X, Tumblr, YouTube, and Mastodon accounts. You can listen to us on Global Community Radio Channel 1 every Saturday night at 11 Eastern. And you can listen to us on great Pacifica stations, including KCEI in Taos, New Mexico, KZGM in Kabul, Missouri, and WMTB St. Petersburg, Florida. So be sure to listen to us on your local Pacifica affiliate. And we're thinking about the folks in St. Petersburg at WMTB. Of course, the hurricane hit Florida just a couple of days ago. Hopefully everybody is safe down there. I will say we are recording this show on Thursday, August 31st, 2023. And we got to get to our first story here. Mitch McConnell froze again, this time for about 30 seconds or so. I have this story. This is Frank Thorpe V writing for NBC News. This is dated August 30th. Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell appeared to freeze again Wednesday, this time during a gaggle with reporters in Covington, Kentucky, stopping for more than 30 seconds after he was asked if he would run for re-election. The Kentucky Republican froze in July at a news conference on Capitol Hill, going silent for 19 seconds before being escorted away from the cameras. The 81-year-old McConnell returned shortly afterwards and continued his news conference telling reporters, quote, "I'm fine," end of quote. When it became apparent that McConnell had frozen again on Wednesday, an aide came up to him and asked, quote, "Did you hear the question, Senator?" End of quote. McConnell continued to be unresponsive, and we'll have the audio of that right now. Let's go ahead and play it.
What are my thoughts about what?
Running for re-election in 2026.
That's
Did you hear the question, Senator? Running for re-election in 2026? All right, I'm sorry, you all. We're going to need a minute. Senator. Benny.
Okay.
Somebody else have a question? Please speak up.
So there's the audio there. As you can see, he froze up for quite a good length of time. Once McConnell re-engaged, he responded briefly to another question about Kentucky Attorney General Daniel Cameron, a Republican. His aide needed to repeat the question to him. McConnell was then asked about Donald Trump, another question that had to be repeated. McConnell brushed off the question because he does not usually engage in Trump-related topics. He then left. Reporters did not ask McConnell about the episode before he departed. A McConnell spokesperson said, quote, Leader McConnell felt momentarily lightheaded and paused during his press conference today, end of quote. An aide added that McConnell feels fine, but will consult a doctor before his next event as a, quote, prudential measure, end of quote. Well, it sounds like he needs a piece of the rock. Get it? Prudential? McConnell spoke for about 20 minutes on Wednesday before the question and answer session with reporters. So there you go, folks. Yeah, this is not a new thing for Mitch McConnell, as this happened in July. So I'm beginning to think it's time for Senator Mitch McConnell, Moscow Mitch. He needs to step down. He really does. He needs to step away from public office, let Governor Beshear appoint a Democrat in there, show the people of Kentucky how good things are when Democrats are in charge, and then maybe they'll vote for him. And maybe they'll get rid of Rand Paul, that beady-eyed little bastard. Oh, I hate Rand Paul. It's too bad his neighbor didn't kick his ass harder. And I've said that for years. I don't care. Oh, my God. Well, I tell you what, let's go on to our next story here. We mentioned Rudy Giuliani, so let's get to this. This is Andrew Goudsward writing for Reuters. This is also dated August 30th out of Washington. Donald Trump's former lawyer, Rudy Giuliani, is liable for defaming two Georgia election workers who were the target of vote-rigging conspiracy accusations following the 2020 U.S. presidential election, a U.S. judge in Washington ruled Wednesday. U.S. District Judge Beryl Howell issued the order as a sanction against Giuliani for failing to turn over electronic records sought by the two Fulton County election workers, Wandrea Shea Moss and her mother, Ruby Freeman, in the case. Howell found that Giuliani refused to comply with a process for producing records known as discovery and rejected the former New York mayor's argument that the election workers used the lawsuit to harass him. Now, think about this. He defamed them, and yet he's now playing the victim, saying that they were harassing him. This is atypical out of the Republican playbook. Play the victim while you're victimizing others. That is absolutely what they do. As I've said before, they do two things. They project and then they gaslight. They project and gaslight. In her order, Howell wrote, quote, donning a cloak of victimization may play well on a public stage to certain audiences, but in a court of law, this performance has served only to subvert the normal process of discovery in a straightforward defamation case, end of quote. And I can tell you why Giuliani is avoiding discovery. Because discovery, you're placed under oath, and you have to answer everything. It doesn't even have to be related to the 2020 election in Georgia. If they ask you anything, you have to answer truthfully or you're in contempt. They can ask you about anything in discovery. As a matter of fact, the perfect story to that is former Minnesota Governor Jesse the Body Ventura during his time as an announcer for what is now WWE. He sued Vince McMahon and the WWF, which again is now WWE, for not paying him royalties. So he was telling his attorney about Vince McMahon somehow got tipped off that Jesse Ventura was trying to unionize the wrestlers. So the attorney says, okay, I can find out what happened in discovery. I can ask him anything he has to answer. It doesn't have to be related to this case about getting royalties. So the attorney goes in on discovery, and it's all videotaped, and says, Mr. McMahon, has there ever been an attempt to unionize the wrestlers? And McMahon said, no, there's never been a union. I think Jesse Ventura spouted off about trying to form one. Well, Mr. McMahon, how do you know that? Were you in the room? No, I wasn't in the room. Well, then how do you know? Hulk Hogan told me. And it was like, whoa, because that had never come out before. So according to Jesse Ventura, Hulk Hogan was the one that ratted him out to Vince McMahon about unionizing the wrestlers, because Jesse Ventura, when he did the Predator movie, joined the Screen Actors Guild. So he's in a union. He gets union benefits for life. You know, this is why unions are a good thing. And we'll get to a couple of good union stories here later on in the show. But that came up in Discovery on a different topic, totally unrelated to getting his royalties paid to him. So again, anything can be asked in Discovery. So let me go ahead and continue here with the story about Rudy Giuliani. Giuliani argued in court filings that he had sought to turn over records, but faced several obstacles, including having his phone seized by federal agents in 2021. Really? That sounds like an excuse to me. Ted Goodman, a political advisor to Giuliani, called the ruling, quote, a prime example of the weaponization of the justice system where the process is the punishment, end of quote. Yeah, that's how I feel about that. Giuliani is also facing criminal charges in Georgia's Fulton County for allegedly aiding Donald Trump's effort to overturn his election loss in the state, including by making false claims about Moss and Freeman. Giuliani has called that indictment a travesty. The judge's order means that Giuliani will have to pay damages for spreading false claims that Moss and Freeman secretly processed and counted batches of illegal ballots at a Georgia arena used to tabulate votes following the 2020 election. The pair said they received death threats and harassment after Giuliani identified them by name and likened them to drug dealers. As a matter of fact, I think they had to move out of the state. Freeman and Moss said in a statement that the ruling confirms that, quote, there was never any truth to any of the accusations about us, end of quote. Giuliani previously admitted that his statements were false and damaged Moss and Freeman's reputations, but left open the possibility of challenging the claims on appeal. Giuliani will now face a civil trial in federal court in Washington to determine how much he will have to pay. Moss and Freeman settled defamation claims against far-right news outlet One America News Network last year. Yeah, OAN, the home of Tomi Lahren. The bleach went from her hair all the way to what was left of her brain. Yeah, can you tell I don't like these people? I really hate them. I really do. Oh, but Darren, it's just a difference of politics. It shouldn't be like that. No, it's a difference of morality. It really is, folks. Because Republicans basically want to kill off poor people and the old people and the disabled. Democrats don't want to do that. Sorry, got news for you. Got news for you. Unreal. Let's go ahead to our next story here. This is Amer Madani writing for the Associated Press. This is dated August 30th out of Washington. Listen to this, folks. The White House on Wednesday said that it has new intelligence that shows Russian President Vladimir Putin and North Korean leader Kim Jong Un have swapped letters as Russia looks to North Korea for munitions for the war in Ukraine. Yeah, because they're running out of stuff and they're not getting the job done. National Security Council spokesman John Kirby detailed the latest finding just weeks after the White House said that it had determined that Russian Defense Minister Sergei Shoigu, during a recent visit to Pyongyang, called on North Korean officials to increase the sale of munitions to Moscow for its Ukraine war. Kirby said that Russia is looking for additional artillery shells and other basic material to shore up its defense industrial base. He added that the letters were, quote, more at the surface level, end of quote, but that Russian and North Korean talks on a weapons sale were advancing. The leaders exchanged the letters following Shoigu's visits. Kirby, using the acronym for the Democratic People's Republic of Korea, said, quote, following Shoigu's visit, another group of Russian officials traveled to Pyongyang for follow-up discussions about potential arms deals between the DPRK and Russia, end of quote. Kirby declined to detail how U.S. officials had gathered the intelligence. Shortly before the White House unveiled the new information about North Korea and Russia's weapons talks, North Korea launched a ballistic missile toward its eastern waters, according to South Korea's military. The missile test came just hours after the U.S. flew at least one long-range bomber to the Korean peninsula in a show of force against the North. The Biden administration has repeatedly made the case that the Kremlin has become reliant on North Korea as well as Iran for the arms it needs to fight its war against Ukraine. North Korea and Iran are largely isolated on the international stage for their nuclear programs and human rights records. In March, the White House said it had gathered intelligence that showed that Russia was looking to broker a food-for-arms deal with North Korea in which Moscow would provide the North with needed food and other commodities in return for munitions from Pyongyang. And yes, North Korea does need food. People are starving there every day, well, except for the leaders. The leaders are fine. They're just taking everything and stuffing it in their own pockets, just like all fascists do. Donald Trump, Vladimir Putin, Xi Jinping, Kim Jong Un, any other fascist despot. The Republican Party. They're all a bunch of fascist despots. Sorry, they are. Just look at their record. Late last year, the White House said that it had determined that the Wagner Group, a private Russian military company, had taken delivery of an arms shipment from North Korea to help bolster its forces fighting in Ukraine on behalf of Russia. Both North Korea and Russia have previously denied the U.S. allegations about weapons. North Korea, however, has sided with Russia over the war in Ukraine, insisting that the hegemonic policy of the U.S.-led West has forced Moscow to take military action to protect its security interests. At the United Nations on Wednesday, the United States, the United Kingdom, South Korea, and Japan urged North Korea to halt arms negotiations with Russia. Any Russian-North Korean arms deals would violate UN Security Council resolutions backed by Russia that prohibit all countries from buying or obtaining any arms from the North, the four countries said in a joint statement. According to the statement that was read by U.S. Ambassador to the United Nations Linda Thomas-Greenfield, who was flanked by diplomats from the three other countries, said, quote, "This sends the wrong message to aspiring proliferators that if you sell Russia arms, Russia will even enable your pursuit of nuclear weapons." End of quote. Donald Trump traded letters with Kim during his administration in an unsuccessful bid to encourage the North Korean leader to abandon his nuclear weapons program. Yeah, Donald Trump and his love letters to Kim Jong Un and to Vladimir Putin and to Xi Jinping. Sorry, Donald Trump is in the same boat. Despots, fascist despots. And some of you Republicans that still support Trump, you better start using what's supposed to be in your head, which is your brain. Most of you have it where you sit. But if you have it up in your skull, you better start using it to think. You better start. Because this is what's going to happen. You've been warned. You have been repeatedly warned. Now, here's the interesting part. I love how they just briefly mentioned the Wagner Group. I don't think we've talked about this story yet. The head of the Wagner Group has apparently been assassinated by Russia. I have this story. This is Meredith Deliso and Tanya Stukalova writing for ABC News. This is dated August 29th. Wagner Group leader Yevgeny Prigozhin was buried in a private funeral on Tuesday, his press service said, nearly a week after he and 9 others died in a plane crash in Russia. The 62-year-old Prigozhin was buried at the Prokhorov Cemetery of St. Petersburg in a closed funeral. That is according to his press service on the website Telegram. About 20 to 30 people attended the 40-minute VIP funeral, according to a cemetery employee. The attendees were all dressed in civilian clothes with no military uniforms seen and included relatives and close associates of Prigozhin. Prigozhin, a businessman who rose to become a powerful international paramilitary leader, was a former close ally to Russian President Vladimir Putin. A Kremlin spokesperson told reporters earlier Tuesday that Putin was not planning to attend Prigozhin's funeral. Prigozhin's private plane mysteriously crashed on August 23rd near the town of Kuzyenko, north of Moscow. DNA tests showed that the remains recovered from the site matched all 10 people on the passenger list, which included Prigozhin and Wagner Group co-founder Dmitry Utkin. That is according to Russian investigators. Describing their findings from an initial investigation, U.S. officials told ABC News last week that the crash may have been caused by an explosion on board the plane, perhaps by a well-placed bomb. U.S. Department of Defense said that there was no indication that a surface-to-air missile was the cause of the crash. The death of Prigozhin came exactly 2 months after he led a day-long mutiny against Moscow. Wagner Group forces, which had been fighting in Ukraine, turned from their headquarters in Rostov-on-Don, a key Russian city near the southern border, and marched toward the capital in the evening on June 23rd. Within a day, they had turned back. Asked on Tuesday whether the U.S. believes Putin was behind the plane crash that killed Prigozhin, White House Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre laid out the Kremlin's long history of killing its opponents before telling reporters it's, quote, pretty evident what happened here, end of quote. The Kremlin has vehemently denied having any involvement in the plane crash. Kremlin spokesperson Dmitry Peskov told reporters last week, quote, there has been a lot of speculation around this crash and the tragic deaths of the plane's passengers, among them Yevgeny Prigozhin. Of course, the West presents all this speculation from a particular angle. All of that is sheer lies, end of quote. Oh, really? Yeah, I don't think so, buddy. Russia's investigative committee has launched a probe into the incident. I'm sure they have. In a televised address a day after the crash, Putin said Prigozhin was, quote, a man with a complex destiny, and he made serious mistakes in life. He achieved the results he needed both for himself and when I asked him for the common cause, as in these last months, end of quote. Yeah. So there you go, folks. Russia apparently assassinating Prigozhin for treason, mutiny, whatever you want to call it. And right now we have a little bit of breaking news. This is Peter Shalamabuz writing for ABC News out of Georgia. Donald Trump has entered a plea of not guilty in the Georgia election interference case and waived his right to appear at his arraignment, according to a filing this morning. Trump and 18 others were charged earlier this month in a sweeping racketeering indictment for alleged efforts to overturn the results of the 2020 presidential election in the state of Georgia. Trump has said his actions were not illegal and that the investigation is politically motivated. You know what I say to that, right? Yeah, there's your political motivation right there. Fulton County Superior Court Judge Scott McAfee on Monday set the date of September 6 for all 19 defendants to be arraigned on charges and enter their pleas in the case. Several other defendants, including publicist Trevion Cootie, Georgia attorney Ray Smith III, and former Trump campaign lawyer Sidney Powell, have also entered not guilty pleas in order to avoid appearing at their scheduled arraignment. So there you go, folks. They're trying to avoid the cameras because they know if it gets on television, they're done. Their goose is cooked and it's done. It's over with. Stick a fork in them. That's why they're trying to avoid the TV. Let me just tell you, folks, better think about it. Better think about it real good. But to me, this is great news. I love it. This is beautiful. I hope he gets on TV every day. Run it just like they did Watergate. Every day on live national television. Time to happen, folks. Something else that's ready to happen.
Stop. Hammer time.
Uh-oh, it's hammer time. It is time to drop the hammer on the douchebag of the week. We've got 2 winners for you this week, so every time we have 2 winners, we allow Wade Garrett to chime in.
Double douche.
Who is that guy?
Gentlemen, Wade Garrett.
Holy sh!
Exactly right.
So Wade Garrett serves up on a platter winner number 1, Oklahoma State Superintendent of Public Instruction, Ryan Walters. Yes, he wins again. I have this story. This is Tyler Kincaid from NBC News. This is dated August 24th. Deborah Gist's surprise announcement this week that she was resigning as superintendent of Tulsa Public Schools appeared to ward off a threat by Oklahoma's top education official to take over the district, at least temporarily. At an Oklahoma Board of Education meeting Thursday, Ryan Walters, the state superintendent of public instruction, stopped short of following through on his previous suggestions that the district should lose its accreditation, effectively shutting it down, or that the state should take control. Instead, the board, which Walters chairs, voted to require more reports and plans from the Tulsa district, the state's largest, and to revisit its accreditation in 4 months. Walters said, quote, "I would advise Tulsa Public Schools and their leadership, do not test me. I'm willing to do whatever it takes for these kids." End of quote. Oh, really? No, you're doing it so that you can have power, so that you can dismantle public education, because that's what conservatives do. They want to dismantle public education. Do you know why? Because they want your children to be just as dumb or dumber than they are. Walters, a firebrand Republican official who has leaned heavily into the culture wars in his 7 months in office, had spent weeks attacking Gist and arguing that the district she leads, where a majority of students are black and Latino and more than 3/4 are economically disadvantaged, was uniquely bad. He pilloried the district for low academic achievement scores and accused it of financial mismanagement. One of his key demands was that it get rid of Gist. On Tuesday evening, Gist announced that she would step down next month, quote, with a broken heart, end of quote, in hope of averting Walters' threatened takeover. In an interview after Thursday's vote, Gist said that she was relieved the district's accreditation was left intact, but that she's concerned that Walters' threat of drastic action is still looming. Yeah, because it is. She's smart. She knows what side of the bread the butter's on. She said, quote, "This is about Ryan Walters using Tulsa and me as a political football and furthering his personal and political agenda." End of quote. Yeah, she's got that right. The Board of Education voted to maintain Tulsa Public Schools' current accreditation status, quote, with deficiencies, end of quote, which means the district has specific problems it needs to fix. The board also voted to require the district to create a professional development plan to train teachers in the science of reading, along with a corrective action plan for failing schools. And the district will have to provide monthly in-person reports to the state board for the next 4 months. Gist, who grew up in Tulsa, was the education commissioner in Rhode Island, the same type of role Walters holds in Oklahoma, before she returned to her hometown. She had been an education reform advocate who enacted more aggressive evaluations of teachers. But after she went to Tulsa Public Schools in 2015, she aligned herself more with teachers' unions and pushed for better funding and pay. Yeah, because she knows what side of the bread the butter is on. She's not a dumb woman. Sorry, she's smart. She's smarter than Ryan Walters and any other Republican that's in power. You can quote me on that. She told NBC News in a phone interview last week that she took the job in Tulsa because it's the district that made her want to become an educator. She called it a blessing and a dream job. But this week, Gist said she decided to resign because she thought it was the best thing she could do to ensure the local elected school board remained in charge of the district. She also worried Walters could move to strip her of her educator's license or revoke the district's accreditation without due process. In an interview after the state board's vote, Gist said, quote, "This district is my home. These are the schools that raised me, that made me, not just as an educator, but the person I am today. And nothing matters to me more than serving the students. And unlike Ryan Walters, I'm not willing to put my own interest above the needs of the children of Tulsa." End of quote. Gist had only one meeting with Walters, she said, and it was at her request this month. She said it lasted about 30 minutes, mostly focused on financial issues, and that Walters didn't raise the issue of student achievement. An Oklahoma Education Department spokesman said Gist controlled whether the pair met and accused her of being, quote, openly hostile, end of quote. Really? Yeah, I guess I'd be openly hostile too if some son of a bitch like Walters came in and tried to dismantle my school district. I guess I'd be a little openly hostile too, wouldn't you? Spokesman Dan Isett said, quote, with her departure, we are optimistic that this is a step in the right direction, end of quote. No, it's a step in the wrong direction, you moron. At Thursday's Board of Education meeting in Oklahoma City, Jenna T. Marshall, a Tulsa school board member, implored the state to give us grace and allowed the district to work with its new interim superintendent to launch initiatives to improve academic achievement. According to 2022 state report cards, just 13% of students in the Tulsa district meet grade level standards on the state test compared to the statewide average of 28%. Again, because Republicans have been dismantling public education for the last 40 years. After the vote, some of those who spoke during the public comment period said they were glad the state board was stepping up and delivering consequences, but many defended Gist and criticized Walters' approach. Ryan Daly, a father from Tulsa, said, quote, I watched a lifelong Tulsan and a lifelong educator fall on her sword to save our district from what would surely be a bungled and disastrous takeover by someone who shows zero interest in our kids other than as a pawn for his political career. End of quote. He addressed Walters directly, saying, quote, that is strong leadership. You are not a strong leader. End of quote. Walters did not respond in the moment, but Isett later emailed that Walters, quote, did exactly what he said he was going to do, stand up for Tulsa kids, end of quote. Yeah. While cutting the way that they can learn, because Republicans want to cut education. They want to gut public education because they want kids to go to private charter schools. Not your kids, not if you're poor, not if you're black, not if you're brown. They want white kids to go to charter schools because they got higher test scores. Or at least that's their belief. We've talked about it on this show multiple times about the Grand Rapids Public School District chartering 21 private charter schools. There are 21 private charter schools that are licensed by Grand Rapids Public Schools. It's horseshit that this is allowed to happen. Carmen Drummond, a Tulsa parent who described herself as a conservative Republican, also directed her remarks at Walters. She said, quote, you need to stop talking and you need to start listening. If you want to come to Tulsa and you want to have town meetings with parents and you want to learn about the troubles and challenges that TPS has, I'm sure lots of people will show up and talk about it. There are problems at TPS, but a state takeover violates the basic constitutional principle of our government, which is local control. End of quote. Yeah, there we go, folks. She knows what side of the bread has the butter, even for a conservative. Back in Tulsa, high school students staged a walkout Thursday in support of the district. Good for them. Good for them. Ahead of the Board of Education meeting, Janice Danforth, who leads the Tulsa chapter of Moms for Liberty, a conservative activist group. No, let me correct that. They've been labeled a hate group by the Southern Poverty Law Center. They are a legitimate hate group, anti-government hate group. This Danforth said she was glad Walters was holding Gist accountable for, quote, a lack of leadership. Oh, really? You know. Danforth, who added that she had had multiple conversations with Walters about concerns over school library books, said, quote, we're at a place in time where boldness matters. And he's being bold. And he's fighting for what he believes is right. And I stand by him on that because I feel the same. End of quote. Walters, who has also pushed to restrict library books with sexual references and called for hanging the 10 Commandments in public schools, put forward 2 new requirements at Thursday's board meeting that would apply to all districts in the state. The board voted to require districts to report any programming funded directly or indirectly by a foreign government and to provide the state with all informal guidance it is given to staff members about LGBTQ-related issues. Yeah, because Moms for Liberty, Karens for fascism, as I call them, they want to get rid of LGBTQ kids. They probably would execute them if you allowed them. They probably would. They don't want anybody to learn. They want children, they want your children, folks, to be just as dumb or dumber than they are. You better think about it, and you better get in tune right now before it's too late. So, winner number 1, Ryan Walters. And speaking of fascism, winner number 2, Ottawa County Administrator John Gibbs. That big fat piece of whale feces. I've got this story. This is Sarah Leach writing for the Holland Sentinel. This is dated August 28th. I'm done joking about Ottawa County. This is going to be an epic episode right here, right now for this. The battle for message control at the Ottawa County Department of Public Health reached a fever pitch Monday after Administrator John Gibbs ordered staff to seize the department's social media accounts. You heard that right. This fascist piece of whale feces has now taken over all dissemination of communications for the Ottawa County Department of Public Health. Get ready, you'll see ivermectin on their Facebook page soon. I guarantee it. Just before 2:30 p.m. August 28th, a post signed by Gibbs and Board Chair Joe Moss appeared on the Health Department's social platform stating the county set a fiscally responsible budget for public health with a general fund allocation of $2.5 million. Fiscally responsible. These are the same fiscally responsible morons that have had to dip into the coffers to pay their attorneys. Yeah, fiscally responsible my ass. In the joint statement, Moss and Gibbs wrote this, quote, "In line with fiscal responsibility and making the most of taxpayer dollars, the county is requiring that the general fund contribution to the Department of Public Health's budget return to average pre-COVID levels. This is a process all American families and businesses are going through, and it will not result in the discontinuation of any mandated services, and especially not the closure of Ottawa County Department of Public Health." End of quote. Bullshit. This is what he wants to do. He wants to shut down Ottawa County Department of Public Health. He wants to get rid of Adeline Hambley because she's a thorn in his side, because she doesn't want to do what he wants to do, which is push ivermectin and all this other crap. Health Officer Adeline Hambley told the Holland Sentinel and other media outlets last week that Moss's demands to slash her budget next year by nearly $4 million could violate her state-mandated duties to protect public health and potentially close the health department this year. Hambley has an ongoing lawsuit against the Ottawa County Board of Commissioners over claims Ottawa Impact-linked members have repeatedly interfered with her ability to do her job and wrongfully demoted her in an attempt to appoint their preferred candidate. Yeah, and that's what they're doing right here with this budget cut. They are interfering with her ability to do her job. Ottawa Impact is a far-right fundamentalist group created by Moss and Vice Chair Sylvia Rodea after they unsuccessfully challenged the previous board and county health officer over COVID-19 mitigation mandates in 2020 and 2021. Hambley used the health department's social media accounts on Thursday, August 24th, to communicate with the public about the heightened tensions between herself and Gibbs over an appropriate level of funding. Emails provided to the Holland Sentinel show Hambly telling Gibbs the request was nearly impossible to accommodate. Hambly wrote to Gibbs on August 22nd, quote, Commissioner Moss's proposal would slash funding from a $6.4 million total general fund contribution to a total of $2.5 million, a reduction of over 60%. This action brings the total operating budget for 2024 to $500,000 less than the 2009 budget, which was during the worst economic conditions the United States has experienced since the Great Depression. End of quote. According to county officials, no other departments were asked to reduce their budgets. Hambly was given a little less than 2 days to submit a revision. Tensions reached a peak Monday when County Communications Director Shannon Felgner was ordered to disable access to the department's social media accounts. Felgner wrote to Allison Clark, Communications Specialist and Public Information Officer for Ottawa County Department of Public Health, quote, I have been directed to do the following. Please disable the Department of Public Health's access to their social media accounts as well as their GovDelivery account. End of quote. GovDelivery is a web-based email subscription management system that allows a member of the public to subscribe to news and information from department websites. Alluding to a social media policy put in place in May that ordered most departments, including Ottawa County Department of Public Health, to coordinate all social media, newsletter, and website publications through the administrator's office, Felgner wrote, quote, while this temporary suspension lasts, if the Department of Public Health believes that you have a public health emergency, you need to communicate via social media or GovDelivery, please do so through me. End of quote. When Hambly was informed of the policy change in May, she was told all communications and interview requests need to be routed through Gibbs and to allow for 24 hours to review. Hambly at the time pushed back, arguing there were exemptions made for other departments, yet the health department was noticeably omitted. Quote, I noticed that the sheriff, register of deeds, clerk, treasurer, etc. were not included in these requirements. I would assume it's because these positions are created by state statute and have defined responsibility over the operations of their respective departments. End of quote. Hambly said the health department is also established under state statute and should be provided the same courtesy. In an email provided to the Holland Sentinel, Hambly wrote, quote, as we strive to prevent disease, prolong life, and promote public health, it is crucial to communicate directly with the public without delay. Local public health is expected to provide both the media and the public with timely, accurate information and answers about public health, disease prevention, and outbreaks. End of quote. At a press conference with media Monday evening, Hambly said it's critical for the health department to be able to reach the public in the event of a health emergency. She said, quote, it's important for me to be able to have the powers and duties to inform and speak with the public as soon as possible if there is a threat to health, and that can be an outbreak. It can also be a threat to funding for providing essential services to the community, so that no longer is the case that we're able to do that, and we'll be looking at some way to be able to communicate quickly with the community moving forward. End of quote. As of Monday, Moss and Gibbs appeared to be in control of Ottawa County Department of Public Health social media accounts. In their statement, they said Hambly's recent pronouncements were made in, quote, bad faith, end of quote, and argued she was engaging in, quote, media theatrics instead of good faith conversations with the county administrator and the Board of Commissioners, end of quote, which they said is, quote, totally inappropriate and unprofessional, end of quote. No, you sons of bitches are inappropriate and unprofessional. Take a look in the goddamn mirror. Meanwhile, Gibbs took to his own Facebook account Saturday, August 26th, and said that anyone opposed to Ottawa Impact's controversial decisions was suffering from, quote, Ottawa derangement disorder, a.k.a. ODD, end of quote. In the post, Gibbs wrote, quote, they say the ODD-ness is caused by exposure to freedom, the Constitution, logic, or those with opposing viewpoints, end of quote. Remember, this is the same John Gibbs that wrote years ago that women shouldn't be in power. They shouldn't run for office. They shouldn't run government. They shouldn't run businesses. They should be in the kitchen barefoot and pregnant. Gibbs wrote that. You know why? Because he is a sexist. He is a sexist pig piece of whale feces. Gibbs was endorsed by Donald Trump when he ran unsuccessfully as a Republican for Michigan's 3rd Congressional District. Democrat Hillary Scholten won the seat by more than 43,000 votes in November 2022. Yeah, because voters in Kent County got smart to this idiotic son of a bitch. In an earlier August post, Gibbs told his supporters to, quote, not pay any mind when they lie, holler, screech, agitate, accuse, slander, plot, scheme, and threaten. If you're not getting attacked, you're not doing it right. End of quote. Well, I tell you what, you're getting attacked right now, you fat son of a bitch. Whale feces. You're a big blob of whale feces. Ottawa Impact fired the previous administrator in January and hired Gibbs, who has no prior experience as a county administrator. Well, there you go. Right there's the proof. You've been seeing it for these last several months. With no public hiring process, bucking the county's historical practice of adhering to transparency. Since starting the job, Gibbs has admitted during public meetings that he takes his input and cues from the chairs and vice chairs of the board and the county's various committees, all controlled by Ottawa Impact. Moss, for his part, is fixated on the health department in the 8 months since taking office. He and Rodea have used the board's public meetings and committee meetings to criticize the departments for everything from sponsoring Grand Valley State University's Sex Ed Week, which it didn't, to saying it was inappropriate for the department to attend local pride events because to do so endorsed the grooming of children. Yeah. The only people that are grooming children are conservatives. Who are the ones that are caught being pedophiles? It sure isn't lefties. It's conservatives. Every single time. Look at the news. Look at the headlines. There's your proof. The statement posted to social media Monday lists Moss and Gibbs as contacts. However, neither have ever responded to the Holland Sentinel's request for comment. Yeah, because they don't believe in transparency. They are fascists. Fascist dictator pigs, pieces of whale feces. Hambly sued the board in early February, claiming Ottawa Impact-linked commissioners have repeatedly interfered with her ability to do her job. That case is currently awaiting oral arguments before the Michigan Court of Appeals after commissioners appealed a lower court's ruling granting Hambly a preliminary injunction. In that ruling, the Court of Appeals ruled the board had the right to fire Hambly if commissioners followed the procedure outlined in state law, which requires the county be able to show just cause, meaning Hambly is derelict or neglectful in her state-mandated duties. Hambly said the budget gutting is a clear indication Moss won't stop until he decimates the department. In a statement Thursday, Hambly wrote, quote, the significant and retaliatory cuts requested on behalf of Commissioner Moss are an attempt to achieve political victory over COVID-19 at the expense of Ottawa County citizens. I can't even make a plan around it. There's a line that you can maybe cut up to where you could squeeze funds from here and there, but there's a point and a line where it's just no longer feasible to exist at all. End of quote. Ottawa Impact currently accounts for 6 seats on the 11-member board. Commissioner Roger Bergman, a non-Ottawa Impact-affiliated Republican, called the latest budget maneuvers by Moss and Gibbs disingenuous. Bergman told the Holland Sentinel Monday, quote, the recent press release sent out by Mr. Gibbs on August 28th is another example of telling lies or half-truths, which, if told often enough, people will start to believe. If you move the numbers around just right, the public won't know whether it's right or wrong. End of quote. He said criticisms Gibbs has voiced about the previous board, that they often voted unanimously on issues, is an indication of competence and wisdom, not a reason to suspect mismanagement. Bergman said, quote, the past commissioners knew exactly what was going on with the budget by asking questions and trusting our administrator as well as department directors. End of quote. He said the $2.5 million ask from Moss isn't realistic. Commissioner Doug Zylstra, the board's lone Democrat, said Moss and Gibbs are the one acting in bad faith. He said, quote, Although I would very much welcome a return to good faith negotiations, as the letter below from Administrator Gibbs and Chair Moss seem to wish, unfortunately, this budget process, especially the first two work sessions, has been marred by both bad faith and lack of transparency and willingness to share information with the entire board by the administrator and leadership. End of quote. There you go. Hit it right on the head. He added, quote, "These are obviously not the hallmarks of good faith negotiations. If leadership wishes to enter good faith negotiations with department heads and with the board as a whole, they need to begin modeling that behavior themselves." End of quote. There you go. Oh, I love it. That is beautiful. Yeah, Zylstra's had enough. He has had enough. And so have I. So to Ryan Walters and John Gibbs, we have this message for you.
Don't be a douchebag.
Yeah, you know what? You two just can't help it. You're both big fat lumps of whale feces. And I'm just going to call, for now on, I'm referring to John Gibbs as that lump of whale feces. So if I ever say that, then you'll know that it's John Gibbs that I'm talking about. Please sue me, John. Please. I'll eat you up in court, you son of a bitch. Let's get to our next story. Good news for unions and for workers. This is Alexandra Olson writing for the Associated Press, dated August 30th out of New York. The Biden administration proposed a new rule Wednesday that would make 3.6 million more U.S. workers eligible for overtime pay, the most generous such increase in decades. The rule revives an Obama-era effort that faced strong pushback from business leaders and Republicans and was ultimately scuttled in court. Labor advocates and liberal lawmakers have pushed the Biden administration to take the fight back up, arguing that overtime protections have been sharply eroded over the decades by wage stagnation and inflation, and I'll add, by Republicans. The proposed regulation unveiled by the Department of Labor would require employers to pay overtime to salaried workers who are in professional, administrative, and professional roles but make less than $1,059 a week or $55,068 a year for full-time employees. That salary threshold is up from $35,568 level that has been in place since 2019, when Donald Trump raised it from $23,660 in a more modest increase than President Barack Obama's earlier proposal. The rule, which is subject to a public commentary period and wouldn't take effect for months, would have the biggest impact on retail, food, hospitality, manufacturing, and other industries where many managerial employees meet the new threshold. Acting Secretary of Labor Julie Su said in a prepared statement, quote, "I've heard from workers again and again about working long hours for no extra pay, all while earning low salaries that don't come anywhere close to compensating them for their sacrifices." End of quote. The new rule is certain to face criticism from business groups that mounted the successful legal challenge against similar regulation that Biden announced as vice president during the Obama administration when he sought to raise the threshold to more than $47,000. But it also falls short of the demands by some liberal lawmakers and unions for an even higher salary threshold than the proposed $55,000. Under the Fair Labor Standards Act, almost all U.S. hourly employees are entitled to overtime pay after 40 hours a week at no less than time and a half their regular rates. But salaried workers who perform executive, administrative, or professional roles are exempt from that requirement unless they earn below a certain level. The left-leaning Economic Policy Institute has estimated that about 15% of full-time salaried workers are entitled to overtime pay under the Trump-era policy. The new rule would almost double that to nearly 30%, according to Labor Department figures. That's still fewer than the more than 60% of salaried workers who were entitled to overtime pay in the 1970s, according to the Liberal Economic Policy Institute. The overtime rule has only been sporadically updated over the past decades, with the Trump increase being the first since 2004. The Labor Department's new rule attempts to change that pattern by adopting automatic increases to the salary threshold every 3 years. Economic Policy Institute's Heidi Shierholz, who was the chief economist at the Labor Department when the Obama administration tried to enact its overtime rule, said, quote, "This is long overdue, it's decades overdue, and it's a really important step," end of quote. Business leaders argue that setting the salary requirement too high will exacerbate staffing challenges for small businesses and could force many companies to convert salaried workers to hourly ones to track working time. Businesses who challenged the Obama-era rule had praised the Trump administration policy as balanced, while progressive groups said it left behind millions of workers. Under the new rule, some 300,000 more manufacturing workers would be entitled to overtime pay, according to the Labor Department. A similar number of retail workers would be eligible, along with 180,000 hospitality and leisure workers and 600,000 in the healthcare and social services sector. The National Retail Federation criticized the proposal and hinted at legal challenges. Of course they would, because they're a bunch of conservatives, right-wingers. All right, so that's potential good news. One more story. This is really good news. This is Jules Roscoe writing for Vice.com. This is dated August 25th. The National Labor Relations Board issued a ruling on Friday that changes the framework for unionizations, making it easier for workers to organize and harder for companies to fight back against them. The new process comes as part of a decision in a case between Cemex Construction Materials Pacific LLC and the International Brotherhood of Teamsters, where the board found that the employer had committed over 20 instances of objectionable or unlawful misconduct between the filing of the union election petition and the election itself, intending to dissuade workers from organizing. The decision requires that if a majority of workers ask a company for voluntary recognition of their union, the company must either immediately recognize them or promptly file a petition asking the board to hold a union election. However, the NLRB press release stated, quote, "However, if an employer who seeks an election commits any unfair labor practice that would require setting aside the election, the petition will be dismissed, and rather than rerunning the election, the board will order the employer to recognize and bargain with the union." End of quote. If the company neither recognizes the union nor files a petition, the board will issue a bargaining order forcing the company to come to the table. This is beautiful. This is great. Seth Goldstein, a partner at Julian, Mirror, Singla, and Goldstein, who has represented workers at those companies attempting to unionize and facing union-busting efforts, said, quote, "This is a very important ruling that will help workers to be able to unionize free of coercion, especially at companies like Trader Joe's, Starbucks, and Amazon. This has been the law of the land for 80 years, so it really goes back to what should have been all along." End of quote. Goldstein was referring to a 1949 Supreme Court decision known as Joy Silk, which stated that an employer had to voluntarily recognize and bargain with a majority of workers who wanted a union and could only contest the unionization if it had good faith doubt about the union's majority status. Joy Silk was abandoned in 1969 in favor of giving companies more leverage in the unionization process. But NLRB General Counsel Jennifer Abruzzo issued a memo earlier this year demanding that the board revive Joy Silk, something that labor activists have been fighting for since it was overturned. The Cemex decision issued on Friday is a partial step in that direction. Eric Blank, an assistant professor of labor studies at Rutgers University, said, quote, "What this decision does is a compromise. It's not a return to card check," end of quote. The unionization process in the 1930s and 40s that said if a majority of workers signed cards stating they wanted a union, the company was obligated to recognize and bargain with them, which Joy Silk had upheld. Goldstein said that despite the incomplete return to Joy Silk, he thought that the ruling was a big step forward, and I agree with him on that. Folks, we are out of time for this week, and we'll be back next week. I'm Darren Gibson. Please support independent media, the First Amendment, and a woman's right to choose.
The stations that carry Southpaws do not necessarily share the opinions expressed on the show.
Southpaws is protected by the First Amendment to the U.S. Constitution and is copyrighted by Big D Entertainment. All rights reserved.